evening. Hello, I'm Dan Lugo, President of Queens University of Charlotte, and on behalf of the Queens community and particularly our Wells Fargo Center for Community Engagement, I would like to thank the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library for this opportunity to collaborate on the creation of this important program around women in politics and the critical importance of our voice and our vote. We are all so proud of the Wells Fargo Center for their work in planning a variety of programs to encourage our campus and the greater Charlotte community to register to vote and take time to learn about the issues on the ballot for the 2020 election. Emily Sears, now a proud senior political science major at Queens, and our Wells Fargo Center Civic Engagement Fellow, has worked so diligently with the Center Director, Dr. Jen Martz, to create civic engagement opportunities, both in person and virtually, for students and to connect political parties together across our campus. Emily is also serving as our moderator for this evening's event, so thank you, Emily, for all your hard work on this program. I join Emily and Dr. Martz in offering my strongest encouragement to everyone to become as civically active over the next several weeks as possible. Whether you register to be a poll worker, and I'm told there's a huge shortage of volunteers this year due to COVID, or help to staff voter registration efforts, or work to get out the vote on the day of the election, please do something to make an impact. And of course, one of the most impactful things you can do is to please make sure that you take the time to vote. Vote early if you can. Your vote, your voice, your power. And now, without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce one of my sheroes and this evening's keynote speaker, the Honorable Vi Lylesleads, our Mayor of Charlotte. It was almost a year ago that I was honored to have Mayor Lyles participate in my inauguration as Queens' 21st president. And I can tell you that it was so special that she, as a Queens alumna, go class of 73, brought greetings and congratulations from the city of Charlotte as its mayor. Since then, I've had several opportunities to get to know our mayor better and to appreciate the incredible leadership she provides to the city of Charlotte as our city continues to grow into a world-class epicenter of commerce, culture, technology, and importantly, social justice and community engagement. Mayor Lyles's commitment to social justice is strong and well-known, and while being the best champion for creating jobs in Charlotte that anyone could imagine, she is equally passionate about expanding affordable housing options and supporting safe, livable neighborhoods for all Charlotteans. Mayor Lyles has served as the city's chief executive since December 4th, 2017, when she was sworn in as the 59th mayor of Charlotte. She began her second term on December 2nd, 2019, after the wise citizens of Charlotte voted to re-elect her in a landslide victory in the last election. And Mayor Lyles earned her bachelor's degree in political science from Queens and a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Even with her incredibly busy schedule, she has remained incredibly loyal to Queens through the years, and we are so grateful. In fact, Mayor Lyles has served on our board of trustees and currently holds the esteemed title of Trustee Emerita. Mayor Lyles, we appreciate your participation in this program and thank you for the many ways you continue to enrich our campus, our community, our city, and all the lives of all of Charlotte's citizens. I'll now turn the program over to Emily, who will begin the conversation with Mayor Lyles, and thank you so much to you both.
Thank you, Dr. Lugo.
Thank you, President Lugo. And Mayor Lyles, it is an honor to be with you tonight and to have the opportunity to speak with you. So I am going to dive right into these questions because I am so excited to hear more about your story. Would you please share a little bit about your journey to government and public service, and talk a little bit about what led you to want to become mayor of Charlotte?
Well, I'm just really delighted, Emily, to be a part of the Queens family, and congratulations, senior major, poli-sci. You know, this is good. You're going many, many places, and one of them might just be where I'm sitting today. So just thinking through that, and thank you. You know, I tell people that it's pretty simple for me to describe my journey. It's one of the age that I am and the place that I grew up. I grew up in the segregated South. And when I got to go to Queens, it was at the first time, I think the second year that they had accepted African-American students. And so when you grow up in that kind of atmosphere, you have to really understand who you are, especially as race is still an issue today, but even more so when I was growing up. I would say to you that the importance of education and the value of family and the idea that you could actually change the world were things that I learned because I watched my family have to do that. But you asked what got me interested in becoming mayor. And what I'd like to talk about is my time in this city. I came to Charlotte to go to Queens, graduated, went away for a little while, but came back to Charlotte. And Charlotte was about 125,000 people. The buses stopped in the middle of the square. It was going through a time where we were doing lots of things that today we look back on and question. Urban renewal, the construction of I-77 through African-American neighborhoods. But what really drove me to run for public office was the idea that I believe this city can be one of the very best in the world, not just the United States, but the world. I believe so much in the power of the people that live here, that while we've made mistakes, where we've had challenges, we've never given up on building some place that everyone can participate in. So when I came into Charlotte, it was like, well, you know, what are you going to do? That was the first question. You know, what are you going to do? What are you going to get involved in? So after raising my family and having the opportunity to actually sit back and think, well, what are you going to do with the next phase of your life? I thought it was time to really begin to serve in a different way. And I decided to run for city council, all because of the streetcar. This day, the streetcar is not done yet, and it's been a while. But I think the overall idea of why did I run is because I love this city. I believe in our city. I believe in the people that live here.
Thank you. That is a truly powerful statement and an incredible journey to where you are now. And you obviously have such strong pillars that have led you to be the mayor and the person that you are now. And I would like to talk a little bit about your time at Queens. As an alumna, we are so very, very proud. And one of the first things I learned about Queens was that you were an alumna. And so I feel very honored that I get to meet you virtually, albeit. So were there particular courses or people or experiences at Queens that helped to prepare you for a life in public service? And would you maybe share one of your favorite memories or traditions from your time at Queens?
Wow, that's a big question, because when you go to college and you're away from home, almost every experience has some kind of pull for you for the future. But I'm going to tell a story that I'm sure most people will find kind of amusing. When I came to Queens, there were 5 African-American students, and Queens was a women's college. And every year there was a freshman mixer with the people at Davison. And you look back on this, but what I found out much later is that there had been a big discussion between the administration of Davison College and Queens because there were only 2 African-American men on the Davison campus. And this was before people made friends across racial lines or across sexual identification lines. So they had a big discussion. So there was this one guy that was at Davison. He was considered very liberal. He had, he was white, but he had really curly hair and he had kind of like an afro. And they made the decision that he'd be my freshman date. And that was the kind of atmosphere we were living in then. But when I left Queens, when I got ready to graduate, things had changed. The Vietnam War, there was protests there. Queens had actually invited speakers with many different points of view to the campus. There were opportunities to participate in creative challenges, to talk about how you felt about things. I had two great professors. One was Patricia Cowell, who was basically a political scientist with a demographic background, and she encouraged me to work on the first successful county elected women's campaign in Mecklenburg County, Liz Hare. And then I had another professor whose name is Dave Seifert, and he encouraged me to go to a program in Washington, D.C. It was called the American Semester. And I got to go to meet the Supreme Court justices. I met senators. I had a 4 months of an immersion into government. And I knew when I came back, and I knew when I graduated, that my life was going to be about public service. So those are the things that Queens helped me do.
Well, I'm happy to report that that has not changed at Queens, and we still very much want students to get those experiences, to go where they want to, whether it's to DC or abroad, and have those experiences that spark their curiosity and get them excited about what they're going to do after Queens. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. And I also would like to ask you a little bit more about your time as mayor. So how has your time in office provided you with new perspectives on voting, particularly in local elections?
Well, you know, when I was reelected, I was in a place that I just thought we have so many great things that we're going to be able to accomplish. We started an entire effort around mobility, meaning how do we create more sidewalks, bike paths, trails, trains and buses, and also cars. We were going to build some roads for cars. But we were just on this really we've been recognized. We're now the 15th largest city in the country. And I just thought that this is going to be the best part. And then the COVID-19 happened and the pandemic happened. Now that doesn't take away the enthusiasm for what we have to be, but it is a challenge to be thinking about what we have to do, because we're going to have 350,000 more people in the next 5 to 10 years, as well as how do you take care of people right now? My first term, I ran on the idea that if you had a job and worked in Charlotte, you ought to be able to afford to live in Charlotte. We had the largest bond referendum and the largest commitment by the private sector to build affordable housing, and we continue that. But now, when I look at what's going on, the disparity that we have around healthcare, the disparity that we have around housing is even more evident. So what I have learned most since the beginning of this year is that to be mayor, you have to be really flexible. You have to really listen hard, and you have to stay focused on what the big things are that have to be done. One day we're going to come out of this pandemic, and when we do come out of it, we want to be the city that learned the most from it, corrected the things that really had to be corrected to make our city equitable, our city a place where people could come and share an opportunity. And so when we talk about the challenges we have right now, what I try to do is frame those challenges in the way that we can see success going forward. And that's my job. It's what I believe that's most important for any place that's going to say, we've moved forward instead of standing still.
Well, we are incredibly grateful for your leadership during this time. I can't imagine the decisions that you and all of our elected officials have made in order to keep everyone safe. So thank you for that continued effort.
Well, we do it together. I have
Yes,
to
ma'am.
say the decision that we made to create a policy team to deal with this pandemic that would represented the city, all of the towns, our county, especially the work being done by our public health department, our school board. That's one of the things that people in this community, we take for granted, but I visit other places, and there are other places where the mayor doesn't talk to the county commissioner chair, the school board isn't interested in what's going on in the city. We're incredibly progressive in the sense that collaboration is one of our values.
And that's absolutely important for this time. And I think it has really been evident from my perspective. I'm not in Charlotte right now, but I keep up with the news every day. And so it's wonderful to see the ways that you continue to protect our community. And I want to ask one more question before we pivot to our panel of phenomenal women leaders. And I want to ask you, what encourages you about the new cohort of young eligible voters and the civic actions that they are starting in their communities?
What encourages me is that they know the change that they want to see. When we were having the protest and I saw young people marching together, black, white, brown, yellow, when I saw them link arms in the concept of we need to change what we're doing to make sure that we care for everyone, that everyone has this opportunity to be treated fairly in this country, that's what makes me really encouraged. That I believe that the young people like you have a concept that says this is the kind of place where we're going to have equity and we're going to have justice. And you're making it happen. You're making all of us think about this world differently. You're particularly helping the city and the schools, all of us think about it differently. So that's what encourages me. Young people like you that are thinking, they're not just kind of coming out and hanging out. They're actually having conversations. They know what they can see that would make a difference in their lives, and they're thinking about that. And what they want is really important. And that's what we've got to work with you guys to make happen.
Thank you so much. I now want to bring in our other panelists to continue this conversation and to hear from them about their roles in the community and how they have just seen these last few months unfold and what lessons that they've brought with them throughout this time. So I want to start, if everyone could please introduce themselves. We will start with Board Member De La Jara. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer De La Jara. I serve on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education as an at-large member. Happy to be here this evening.
Thank you so much, Board Member. Representative Logan.
Good evening. Representative Carolyn Logan, North Carolina House of Representatives. I represent District 101, Mecklenburg County.
Thank you, Representative. And finally, Ms. Hurt.
Good evening. I'm Delores Johnson-Hurt, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I come to you with a background as a broadcast journalist, business owner, nonprofit administrator, and educator. I broke barriers as the first Black undergraduate at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I am a Charlotte implant. I joined the Charlotte League in 2014 and became its president in 2016. I have no doubt that living abroad as an Army brat as a child helped shape my worldview.
Thank you, Ms. Hurt. And I actually would love to start with you and get this conversation going. As the current president of the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, how is it important for people to understand the history of voting in this country and the power they have of voting today?
Well, I want to let you know that men can join the League of Women Voters, and anybody over 16 who share our worldview and our values can join our organization. It's important to understand the history of voting because voting has not always been a right for every citizen in this country. It took over 70 years for the right of women to be able to vote, beginning in 1920. People of color died for the right to vote in the South and could not before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We know from history that voting is not guaranteed and that it can be taken away in many ways, even today, through voter suppression, through making it harder for students to vote by moving polling places from campuses, by limiting voting hours, by requiring IDs, by designing voting districts so it's hard to challenge incumbents, by discouraging voting by mail. Your vote is the most important instrument you have as a citizen. Your vote determines how you live, everything from the cost of your education, to housing, to jobs, to how safe your streets are, to health care and child care. Your vote is so powerful that candidates spend millions of dollars to convince you to vote for them. However, we at the League say that when you do vote, you must be an informed voter. You should research who's on your ballot, who's asking you to give over your power to them. True democracy requires that kind of effort to make it work. And we and you must never take the right to vote for granted.
Thank you, and we are so grateful for the work that you have done in Charlotte and continue to do as the president of the League of Women Voters. And I would like to also ask you, how important do you think it is to be connected and engaged with one's own community? And what advice would you give to young people my age who are looking to be more civically active in their towns or cities?
It's incredibly important to be active in the community where you live or wherever that community is. You should be aware that your voice counts. You should be aware that as a simple human being, you have rights and privileges that you should be able to take advantage of. You should know that voting for the president is a once in a 4-year effort. But in order to make the city run in the way that the mayor has expressed, you have to vote and know the importance of voting for local officials. They are the ones who make the everyday decisions that affect your life. As far as young people are concerned, I think you should become involved early on. I know my parents always voted and they set an example for me. And for many young people, that is the case. I think that you should become civically involved by taking civics courses in high school. That's where it begins. You learn about how your government functions in high school, and it can be carried on in colleges and universities as well. I think that you can become involved in your government, your college government, and that is a precursor for a lot of folks who go into politics. They start by becoming maybe chair of the Student Government Association. Also, I think that you college students are going to be the leaders of the future. And you need to know how government works, and you need to know how to make the changes that you feel should be made. And I'm going to put in a plug right now and say that I'm going to propose that we start a League of Women Voters chapter at Queen's University. I think that would be a great start to learn about our government and to be informed about so many issues that are affecting all of us.
Well, I know that we would love that. So I'll talk with you later and we'll see what we can get worked out.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Board Member De La Hara, I want to pivot to you and ask a little bit about your role. I feel that oftentimes I get a lot of questions from students my age who say, I don't really know what the local offices do. They're always on the ballot. I vote for someone. But I really wanted to make sure that we heard a little bit about your particular role. So could you speak a little bit about the difference between an at-large member and a district representative?
Yes, certainly. So all of the local governing bodies have both district representatives and at-large. And in the case of the Board of Education, we are divided geographically across the county into 6 districts, and then there are 3 at-large members. Our elections happen because we have 4-year terms. In next year, in 2021, the district seats will run, and then 2 years after that, the at-large seats will run. And so that's a little bit different. We're able to do that and spread it out over the 4 years. It's interesting because I remember once looking up the origin of how did at-large come to be, and I couldn't find a clear answer on what the origin of that was. The way that I've often understood it to be of why that would be important is so that there's wider representation across the city. So for example, if I happen to live in an area that maybe didn't share in general my political views and I was unable to get elected, by running at large, I might have a different chance to not be kind of pigeonholed, if you would, by my address. And so it's kind of interesting because that played out a bit in my last election. So I was just recently elected this past November. So a little less than a year ago. I spent 17 years living in Center City, Charlotte, and did all of my work throughout schools in Charlotte, mostly in Title I schools. My husband had taken a job up in Morrisville, and so we had moved to Davidson. Since then, we've moved back to Charlotte, so I'm proud to call Charlotte home again. But at the time of my election, it was interesting how that played out in the at-large role, and that does give me the freedom and flexibility to do that because I don't have to live necessarily in my district. But I'm not certain, but I may be the first person at large on the school board to win not living in the city of Charlotte, to live in one of the other 6 towns. But I think I was able to do that, not just because I connected with the community up there, but because I had a history that was broader across the region. And so I say that to say that I think that that does help in my perspective. Having lived in the city of Charlotte, working in a variety of different schools across the county, then also with my brief stint up there, I mean, we are a very diverse county with different needs and different concerns. And so that's one of the ways that I think I'm able to use that at-large role and bring a perspective from across the county. And I certainly support all of my school, the district leaders, and I would say that when they think of our 145,000 kids, we all think of them as our kids, not just the ones that we serve in our district. I think they all feel that way, but I try to support the work they do. And then there are broader roles too, that I play or work to do. That's, right before this call, we did the equity committee. We had a meeting tonight about that. And of course that affects the whole county. So there's, broad countywide support that I'm able to provide to really serve all of the residents of our whole county.
Thank you for clarifying that. That was very comprehensive, and I even learned a lot. So thank you so much for that. And in your role, so as the at-large representative, how have you been able to nurture a connected and genuine relationship with the communities you share? You mentioned that you view the 145,000 kids as your kids, but how do you find that you are able to connect maybe with the parents or the other members of the community?
Well, first you have to show up and even in the Zoom environment, even in the virtual environment, to be there, to connect, to understand. I was also earlier today on a call, with the Shamrock Gardens community, which is kind of on the northeast side of Charlotte. And so I think getting out there, listening to all parents, being authentic, obviously, you know, I mean, I am just who I am, and I'm not going to go on and take the whole night and explain my whole history that's brought me to where I am today. But you know, using that to inform the relationships and what you can bring to the table, and with a humility of, hey, what can I learn? Because I obviously don't know it all, and don't pretend to know it all. And I think people respond to that. I also, as a side note, speak Spanish as a second language, and have worked with immigrant communities for the majority of my career. And so I'm able to, like today I did 2 Spanish language interviews with Spanish language media to explain our decisions that the board made last night. And so that is also very helpful. I'm glad that I have that skill, and a bit of the cultural awareness, having worked with immigrant communities and lived in South America myself, so that I can also bring that to the table and try to nurture that relationship. And certainly not all of our immigrant communities are Spanish speakers, but it is important for us to always to remember, at least as far as CMS is concerned, that 44,000 of our 145,000 students, English is not their first language. And so it's not just a small, I mean, it's a big chunk of people, and it's multiple languages and multiple cultures, but to the degree that we can continue to welcome all folks into our community, I think it's really important that we reach out and make sure that their voices are also heard.
Thank you so much. That's incredible. And I love that you're using your Spanish to reach communities who, you know, may have a more difficult time transitioning into an English speaking school system. So thank you so much for that and all of the work that you do. And now we are going to transition, and I would like to speak with Representative Logan for a little bit about her background and the lessons that she has learned in her time as the representative for District 101. So Representative Logan, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I did a bit of research before this, and I learned that you were the first Black female police officer in Asheville, which is close to where I'm from, so I loved to see that. And you also went on to become the first Black female trooper in the state of North Carolina. So how did your time serving, first as a police officer and then for the Highway Patrol, how has that informed your time as a representative for the District 101?
Well, since most of my time, I did 7 years with Asheville. And so I would start off with discipline, and that taught me not to lose sight. And I put that in the words of the late Representative Lewis, to keep your eyes on the prize. And from there, that made my dedication with almost 31 years of law enforcement, that I was dedicated to serving the people of North Carolina. And trying to find ways to make, you know, life better. So with doing that, I was serving, protecting people, trying to make things better. But of course, in that time, both being the first Black female to do that line of work with those agencies, I did experience discrimination. That gave me the will to fight. And so if I can't fight for myself, I cannot fight for anyone else. So in doing that type of job, I also came in contact with a lot of different people. And they were dealing with a lot of different situations. So that taught me how to listen. And, you know, listen to people, listen to what they were going through. I worked long hours, all types of shifts, holidays. That kept me away from my family. A day like this, you know, I'd be out there, you saw all the crashes on TV, I'd be out there working crashes, people injured. So that gave me patience. Learning, you know, out there working, I did everything by the rules. You know, you couldn't buy me or anything else. I did everything by the law. It taught me to be honest. I never forgot where I came from. It kept me humble. And so, and I was telling somebody the other day, I said, then, you know, one of my friends always told me, as I went on through my career and I got promoted, I became the sergeant over the entire troop. So I was responsible for 9 counties. And I loved that because I never had to move out of Charlotte. The colonel at the time, we had the first African-American colonel. And he said he would love to promote me and send me somewhere else, but I didn't want to leave Charlotte. So they sent me down to headquarters in Monroe. And I was the PIO. I was trained in the media. I had already been the recruiter. I started out doing that recruiting. I was the poster child. Still only female poster has my picture on it. And so I did all that. So I was at the fair. Anywhere that if there was a large crash or anything that involved, any type of trauma with a trooper, I had to respond to it for the 9 counties in this troop. So I was always somewhere shaking hands, talking to people, giving a good outlook for the patrol. I always had to stay neat and clean and everything like that. So I was their go-to person. My car always had to stay spotless clean. And so my friend would always say, if they wanted someone to run their mouth, they sent the right person. But if anyone's around me, I'm pretty quiet. I don't say anything. Again, that comes from the discipline. You don't just run your mouth. You stay quiet. You listen to what's going on because you may miss something, or running your mouth, you could get hurt. So it's kind of strange that, I will go out and talk all this, but then when I get around people, I'm really quite shy and quiet. But I was the go-to person, the media person, and I was the face of the truth. And they really, because I was the only Black female, I really traveled, the entire state. And, I ended up being in a lot of publications, Albany and a lot of things like that, because I, represented the Highway Patrol, and no one really ever had seen a Black female in a uniform before. So I think just making contact with people and learning how to talk with people and understanding the situations they were in. And everyone that I came in contact with, they were not bad people. They had just had a bad time. They, they violated the law, upheld the law. I also told them what they needed to do to make the situation better, how to take care of it. And most people, we were really friends by the time they left me out there on the shoulder of the road. I had made a friend. And I did everything that I could to help people, because most of them were frightened when they saw that black and silver car pull up. And I think you just need to know how to be nice to people and how to talk to them.
Well, those are incredible stories and incredibly impactful. And thank you for serving in that capacity for 31 years. That is truly an incredible accomplishment. And the fact that you decided to then turn it around and go into politics is also a testament to your desire to serve the community. So thank you for that. And
Welcome.
As a representative, you've been assigned to several subcommittees. And could you please describe those different roles that you've played and how they have impacted the lives of your constituents in the 101st District?
Well, I'm on appropriations, and appropriations is the big one. That's your money. That's the budget, state budget. It comes through appropriations. State and local money comes through appropriations. Anything big comes through appropriations. Out of all the other small, there's a lot of other smaller appropriations, but it all has to come into appropriations. So I'm on that committee. I'm also on appropriations general. A lot of the state agencies come through general appropriations, and I sit on that, and we look at their budget. We'll go through that in the long session. They'll come through and we'll see what they have. You can actually lose personnel in those appropriations. So we'll see what they're gonna have, and they'll present to us their budget for the next 2 years. Then I've got Homeland Security, Veterans, and Military Affairs. So we don't meet that often with that one, and we'll look to see what we can do for our veterans and our military. We got our bases here in North Carolina, and what funds that they're going to need. And like I said, we hadn't done much with the Homeland Security. I have standing committee with school security, and we look at our resource officers and what we'll do for them. We've only met once since I've been on that. And the speaker just assigned me to a standing committee of community and law enforcement and criminal justice. And so we're going to meet, our second meeting is in 2 weeks, and we're working to find how we're going to work with law enforcement. So I'm recommending training, and before this even happened, I'd already pulled in highway patrol, training and standards, justice, and I asked them, how can they work with me to come up with ways to train across the board, across the state, all agencies, and to work with me on how, to come up with some training to do with what's going on, and to put North Carolina above everything else. And then the governor has his task force. And I wrote a resolution. And then when the speaker saw that, he put me on his task force. So there's a way to do things. See, I learned that from law enforcement. So I got put on this task force. And so we're working with that. And I've got several ideas to present on the 28th. And along with several other members on that speaker's task force, how we're going to work with law enforcement. And I'm also going to recommend an oversight committee, like they do in Washington, so we can look at issues that happen with law enforcement, that we keep this going and break off into an oversight committee to look at things that happen in law enforcement that we investigated that comes through the state, that we have a say-so in it.
Well, it sounds like they're keeping you quite busy.
You asked me about my constituents. The committees, now my committees do not work specifically with my constituents. I have to answer for the entire state. But if we have a bill or something that's introduced, my constituents can send me an email and they can suggest to me their feelings on it. If they can tell me they don't like this, we want you to vote no. I've helped my constituents with the unemployment issues. Several of them have had problems, and we call and talk on their behalf. I've led even on Nextdoor when they was having problems getting food for children out of school. And I put that information on Nextdoor, where to go get COVID testing. And I put out a newsletter like most of us do. And they can request to get my newsletter, and I keep up-to-date information on that.
Well, they really do keep you busy. So we thank you so much for the work that you have done and continue to do on all of those subcommittees, but also for the constituents of North Carolina and, of course, your district. And now I would like to pivot back to Mayor Lyles and ask you a couple of more questions about your time in office and just broader trends in the United States. So the US's share of elected officials who are women is lower than other representative democracies. Why do you think this is the case? And do you think this trend is changing in the US today?
Well, I think it's because, as Delores Hurt said, we didn't get the vote for a very, very long time. And I think this country was built around the idea that men, if you look, Constitution Week, I believe, starts the 17th of September. And when you look at what the Constitution did, it was an excellent document. There was no king, there is no, one person in charge and all of that. But it was very much around people that had wealth and owned property. And that's what made the difference long term, is that if you live in our country, power is about wealth and property. So what I see is that as women, we often didn't have the longevity of life. you know, to be able to have children and have to live a long life was very unusual. That we worked in addition to being the moms, we worked jobs, and again, we were never a part of the decision making or the power group. So what's different in other countries perhaps is that they addressed this earlier than we did. We're a young country, but I think that when you look in other communities, I've just started reading the book Caste, and I'm not there yet, but I think that you'll see that there's a correlation between gender as well as caste and as well as race. And I believe that that's why women in this country have not had the opportunity. But given that, the first year that I was elected mayor, I remember being with 25 other mayors that are on the East Coast, taking a picture all together. We just came together, and it has been remarkable to see the number of women, and even just think about in the Democratic primary, as they were going through and making decisions on who is going to be the candidate that the Democrats would nominate for president, the number of women that said, I'm willing to step up and do this. So we're seeing a change. I hope your generation brings us even more change. But just like Representative Logan said, it starts from the very local level. If you do right by your own community, you have the opportunity to take that to a different level. And I believe that's going to take place. I just believe that in this country, gender has a lot to do with power and wealth. And we're just beginning to see that we can change and be a part of that. And that our power doesn't always have to come from wealth, that our power can come by organizing our own communities.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And I would like to talk a little bit about your road to politics. Was there ever a time where you were discouraged from entering politics, and how did you overcome that obstacle and continue working towards your goal of becoming mayor?
I could make a small joke and say it's on Monday nights when we have the city council meetings. I often have an obstacle to follow, or a thought in my mind of why am I doing that? I think that to be an effective leader in a political environment, you have to have that sense of optimism and hope. And so there have been times that I've been discouraged. There was nothing more discouraging than we were trying to negotiate with the state legislature on the rights of LGBT people, and finding that there was always a block. There was always, no matter what we tried to do, until we changed the leadership at the state, we weren't able to get that accomplished, and we still haven't. We've got work to do in that area. So you have to have that sense of optimism. And people say to me, well, what are you going to do about that? And I say, well, the lesson that I learned in that first term is that you never go by yourself to ask for something. You always take with you the people that believe in it. That I mean, it's a lot better to have a leader hear from a constituent than to hear from another elected official. And so what I believe is that you do have tough days. It's always tough for me when we have a 5-year-old shot by a gun, a legal gun in their home. I mean, those days are tough. And when the media will come in and they'll say, well, how do you feel about this? And I just want to say, how do you think anyone feels about the loss of life due to violence in this community? So there are some things that really kind of get next to me personally, and I think it's because I care and I see a path, but that path has to be cultivated with others. It means that I have to have the Mecklenburg delegation that Representative Logan's a part of. It means that if we're going to do something about the digital divide, we have to have the school board leaders with us. And more than anything, for me, you have to be able to walk down the streets of this community and speak to people, and they understand that you're speaking to them and asking what do they need, and that you're listening to them. So I do get discouraged sometimes, but there's always a new day, and there's always a new time, and there's always someone that's going to say or encourage you to take the next step.
Thank you so much. That absolutely encouraged me. So thank you for your role as the mayor and everything that you have done for Charlotte. And as we near the end of our time, I would like to open these last two questions up to the entire panel. And the first one is, and this comes from a student, so this was submitted by a student at Queens, and so I'm quoting them here. They said, what are ways that we can actually make real change happen in our communities? I always hear, write or call your elected officials, but I never hear anything back and nothing seems to change. So that's from a student, and I would like to turn it over to Board Member De La Jara, and then if anyone else would like to jump into the conversation, please feel welcome to do so.
Well, I think that, yes, I mean, it does happen that sometimes, elected officials don't get back because of the volume that happens. I know it may seem like it's easier for someone like me, obviously, than Mayor Lyles with the volume that she probably gets. However, I would say my email list that came in today might rival hers. So, I'm 2 or 3 weeks behind right now myself in getting back to constituents. But I can tell you that it absolutely matters. And so sometimes even if I don't respond, or if someone writes a marathon and I have to just give a snippet because of the time constraints that I have, it doesn't mean that it didn't matter. I think it absolutely does matter. I write my electeds all the time, even if I think they oppose what I say, and even if I think they are already for what I say, because I want them to be able to show their colleagues who might be on the other side of the aisle, hey, look, we have support for this. And so I always encourage people to write, not just to complain, but to also encourage and say, hey, you're on the right track. I'm glad you're going down this path, because I think our constituents need to hear that as well. And so, without that community engagement, I mean, that is what helps drive what we do. Right now, we're just in a really particular bind because half of the emails, I'm just going to say this because COVID, I mean, we need to know what's going on. Literally half the emails I've gotten today are saying to me, you need kids back in school even sooner than what you thought, the plan that we voted on last night. And the other half are saying, what are you doing? Don't you dare do it. Do you not care about, community health or death? And that's what they're writing. And that's how divided we are. These are challenging times that we have before us. So it might not get back, but please do write, and please know that it is important. And if I could also just add to that, I know that sometimes what's going on in the national politics can be so loud and take up so much of our energy, but I really do believe, and I have learned, it's confirmed everything that I believe by now being in office, how important our local politics are. And if I could stress anything tonight, it's that particularly for our presumable young panel that's the listeners that are on tonight, is really pay attention to what's going on in the local politics. Pay attention to what's going on in Raleigh, because it trickles down to all of us. And I know that can be attention grabbing and take up a lot of our energy. But I think a lot of the real decisions that are made, or decisions that are not made, and funding that's needed, or policy change that's needed to give us the freedom and flexibility to do things the way that we know best that things need to be done, sometimes are happening by governing bodies above. And so I would just encourage everyone to really pay attention to that.
And I would like to jump in here and say that to that young student, you have to be persistent. If you believe in something, you will need to fight for it. Change happens slowly oftentimes, and you have to be in it for the long run. After all, we talk about the 70 plus years it took for women to vote in this country. And it's also good to make sure, as the mayor has stated, that you have a group of people who firmly believe in what you believe in, and to and continue to be in touch with your elected officials to make sure they answer your questions. I think persistence and following through would be very important for you to get your thoughts heard.
Well, thank you both for that. I know that sometimes I also feel discouraged sometimes, but it is important to remember that this doesn't happen overnight, and politics takes a long time. But if we are persistent, as you said, Ms. Hurt, and we follow up, then our elected officials will hear that. And that's the beauty, I think, of the democracy that we live in. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to end on this before I ask you all for your advice for voters. What types of discrimination, barriers, or difficulties have you faced in your respective positions, specifically because of your gender? And how have you responded to those situations? And I will turn it over to Representative Logan to start. And again, please feel free to jump in at any time.
I don't think I've had any in this one yet. I'll say.
Well, that's a good thing. That is good.
I think they,
That is great.
I think the highway patrols told them about me. You know, I've had some to get an elevator and they don't speak, you know, and I just return the favor. I mean, I don't speak. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but you know, well, who said I'm older now? So I just return the favor. Like I said, I think the highway patrols passed the word to them that I'm not the one.
I'd like to say that being the head of the League of Women Voters here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I'm surrounded by females. We do have men on our board, but I haven't personally run into gender bias as head of the League of Women Voters, but we do know that it is an uphill struggle for women across the board in this country. And one of the things we recently held was a webinar on the gender pay gap. That is still a huge issue here in this country for women. Women are discriminated against. White men, white women, for example, earn on average 80% of what white men earned. Black women, maybe 60%. Latina women in the 50s. And then you have Native American women who earn even less. So there are many ways in which women just are still discriminated against. And we are finding our voices now. We have a lot of young women who are beginning to speak up, and some of them are considered to be quite radical, but I believe in their thoughts. The new Green Deal, for example, that's something that's very controversial. Free college tuition is very controversial, but women are speaking up for that to happen. And I think we must continue that fight for equality across the board, and be cognizant of discrimination. I mean, there's sometimes you don't even know you're being discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone, for example, not in this current position, into a department store, for example, with a white friend of mine. And I'm the one doing the shopping, but who does a salesperson cater to? The white woman I'm with. And I stand there with my mouth open. So just being surprised at that kind of reception. So gender discrimination is real. You see it in terms of the US Senate, when you don't have very many women there, and you see a lot of old white men making the decisions that have a great impact on the health care, the reproductive care of women, that they make decisions about child care. So even if you don't see it and experience it outright, it is still very much there, not only in this country, but around the world still.
I want to just add one other thing, Emily. I think every group of young women ought to take a class in leadership and gender discrimination, because as Ms. Hurt said, it's not always overt. There's lots of gender discrimination in pay and promotions and things like that. But one of the things that I tell young women a lot is have you ever been in a room and everybody's talking and you say something that's really appropriate and really great, and it's kind of moves on to the next step, but then the guy next to you says it, and he says exactly what you said, and people go, wow, that's a great idea, let's go ahead and do what he said. Those are the kinds of tools that women have to be able to learn, the slights, the pressures that you have to have, the way that the business world works as well as government, is that women are first to be, are often ignored or not listened to. And these subtle things that they do, I think that women have to understand and learn how to avoid that. You know, this idea that we don't learn, sometimes we'll say, you'll hear a guy, someone come in and say, well, I have something that has to be done the last minute, your boss. And the woman's thinking, well, I've got to go take care of my kid. And the guy is saying, oh, I'll do it, I got it, I'll take it. When he really has the same responsibility. But he's going to go back after 5 minutes and come back and say, well, you know, I can't really get to it right now, but I'll get to it about tomorrow morning. You know, there are all these small things that they don't teach us, and we experience it, and we need to teach each other.
And I'll just finish that out by echoing exactly what the mayor said. I've definitely experienced it in the way that I've been spoken to. The tone that's used, or, you know, I know gaslighting is the new phrase that's common. And it's interesting how I've noticed my response shift to that. I am not a conflict avoider by nature, but I also don't seek it. Like, I'm not actively walking around trying to engage in conflict with people. So it's it many times has caught me off guard when people respond or you know, that way to me. And I have learned to build up resilience and tolerance of how I'm going to deal with that in the moment. And sometimes I respond well, sometimes I've walked away, and then I've considered, how can I respond to that differently next time? It's like I feel like I'm building up kind of an arsenal, if you will, not again because I want to attack, but because I need to be on the defense, and I need to be on it in the moment when people say things that are really inappropriate. It just happened to me last Thursday at an event. I won't say more, but someone kind of yelled out something to me, and I'm so glad that I had the wherewithal to come back and be like, no, here's what happened. Let me tell you. And there have been times where maybe it would have shaken me, but I've learned to do better. And so every time I kind of evaluate, you know, how did I handle, what can I do better so that I'm prepared for the future. As far as actually getting elected, what's interesting is I'm actually one of 9 on a board where 8 are women. And so I actually think people sort of assume that the school board will be mostly women. And I'm proud to serve alongside all of the women. But I also think that in our society, what that translates to, unfortunately, is along with the majority of our teachers, obviously being female educators, is I think that there's a sense that that's women's work. And I do think that it plays out in the way our country, certainly our state, has chronically underfunded education. Because I do think there's this sense of kind of like, well, that's women, when they think about, you know, paying teachers. And, you know, God bless Representative Logan for being one of those who fights for our teachers and for teacher pay. But I do think that's something for us to consider, because I think there's this sense of, well, they're just teachers, they're just women, it's women's work, and they're not respected. And I would argue that our educators have the most important job in our community, because they're literally raising the future. It's the economic workforce that's going to drive our community. It's raising educated community members who are contributing, who are leading our city and maybe our country. So I would like to see a shift in the way that we think about education as maybe not just being women's work, but lifting it up to, they've got a really important job, and the respect to be there all around. I think that's important that we move that direction.
That is very important. But if you look at our educational system here locally, and you look behind the scenes, although you have many women on the school board, who's actually running the district? Who's a superintendent? How many people, men, are making decisions as far as education is concerned? Another thing I've noticed and I've heard is that teachers need to be more proactive. A lot of teachers, I understand, are afraid to speak up and speak out for themselves. And I've also heard that, unfortunately, we don't have as many women actually voting, as need to be. So those are some areas we need to address also.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and some powerful things that we can all think about after this, and make sure that we are uplifting those voices that need to be heard in our government and local areas. And finally, before we transition to the very end, where Dr. Martz will speak, I would like to ask you all to just say a quick word about your encouragement for voters, particularly young people like myself, as we head into the 2020 election. That is a mere, I think we're at 48 days away. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's coming up quickly. So Mayor Lyles, I would like to start with you.
Well, the first thing that I would say is that if you want to see change, you have to be a part of it, and that means you have to vote. This is a democracy, but it's a representative democracy. If you want to be represented, you have to vote.
Thank you. And now Representative Logan.
This is, you keep hearing, this is going to be an important election. Mecklenburg County for early voting has 33 sites, the most there's ever been. The majority of them has free parking. We need people to work the polls. They're going to pay for you to work the polls. It's going to be important that as many people who can to get out and vote. So as you've heard from the mayor, it's important. Your vote is important. You can make a difference. You've heard one of the questions, how can I make a difference? Get out the vote. And the votes count. We had a lot of elected officials running for office, and they lost because we didn't get out the vote. So it does count. And that's how you can make a difference. Get out the vote and take someone with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member De La Jara.
Nothing more important than us showing up, taking someone with us, and making sure we have a plan. Vote as early as possible to make sure that nothing happens, something come up on election day. And also sometimes I see, on social media, folks maybe chiming in about how certain candidates may not be their dream candidate for whatever reason. And I would just say, really think through that, the consequences of not voting or maybe not being fully on board. I don't know that anyone is going to fill my ticket perfectly, but I would say to that, if you're not satisfied, also, get involved in your party, like make change from within, because we can't just kind of sit back and be like, well, I'm not really sure. Like, do that also. Do the advocacy work from within the party of your choice to move it in the direction that you want it to be, so that you can have better candidates if that's what you want. But don't miss out on this very important election.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Hurt.
Yes, I'd say the league is very big on registering voters. For example, we registered 7,000 new citizens a year. So make sure the people around you are registered to vote. Make sure that you do research who you are voting for. Don't just pay attention to all the commercials that you're hearing and seeing on TV and the internet. Research your candidate. And also know that while this is one of the most important elections on a national level that you're going to be involved with, remember your local, your down ballot people are just as important when it comes to how you live your daily life here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Absolutely. It has been an honor to talk with you all and hear your stories and your wisdom about your roles in the community and voting. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And it has truly been my pleasure to be able to meet you all virtually. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Jen Martz, who is the director for the Wells Fargo Center for Community Engagement.
On behalf of the Queens community and the Wells Fargo Center for Community Engagement, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, we thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us tonight and learn about and celebrate women in government and making our voices heard. To echo the words of President Lugo, please take the time to be civically engaged over the next 47 days. Serve as a poll worker, attend a workshop and learn about issues on the ballot. Queens has some that you're welcome to join us on Tuesdays at noon, and make sure that you get out and vote. If you prefer to vote with an absentee ballot, you can request your ballot now. If you prefer to vote in person, early voting in North Carolina starts on October 15th. And if you'd rather make your voice heard on Election Day, get to the polls on November 3rd. Whatever method you choose, please make sure you make the time to make your voice heard. Thank you again to Mayor Lyles and each of our phenomenal panelists for their time and insights. Thank you, Emily, for being a terrific moderator and being the best partner I could ask for in registering and educating voters, not just at Queens, but in the Charlotte community. And thank you to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library for their partnership in this program. I hope all of you have a wonderful evening, and I will see you at the polls.